Yeah, hi and welcome everybody. Today we have Rob Price zooming in. Welcome and thank you for being in the show today.
Thanks, Philip. Delighted to be here.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm in Nottingham in the UK. The sun's out. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
That sounds good. Yeah, so first of all, as you know, in this meeting with Changemakers, I always would like to know first who is here with me. So Rob, if you would like to introduce yourself, where you're from and what brought you into the world of impact creating and transformation, change management. So maybe we take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the easiest way to start is far too many years, probably kind of over 30 at this stage, in a world of technology, delivering solutions that enable organisations, public and private sector, to do the things that they needed to do. And have operated within big global organisations, delivering large-scale transformation and change, very much focused on the execution of it, and often focused around things that are easy to talk about with people in the pub. So if you can imagine delivering a system for government that enables people to work out how to get from anywhere to anywhere, because that makes sense to people, rather than talking about a back office system that is hidden from everything. So front office change and transformation enabled by technology. And that's what I do. Sometimes I've done that in terms of helping organizations to do that. So in a consultancy role, sometimes I've done it within an organization in an exec role with responsibility for that change and transformation. I love hands-on driving change, but I equally like the thought leadership side as well. So it's how do we make things real that we envision, imagine, and then make real. And I guess kind of we'll come to the conversation in terms of then thinking about the broader impact on society and the planet of the things that I've then done around digital responsibility. But that for me is a perfect illustration of thought leadership and thinking about how do we do things better? How do we be more conscious of the impact that we have on society, and then trying to find a way to actually make change happen, because that's desperately needed, as we'll talk about.
Absolutely agree. And that's actually a good pass to me again. That's also the reason why I invited Rob to the show, because I was seeing that you're very involved in digital responsibility. And this is such an important topic at the moment, since for the circular economy or decarbonization strategies, many people put their hope into technology, which is justified on the one hand, but maybe on the other hand, technology can also create some dangers. So maybe your perspective on this whole technology discussion, what you which hopes do you put in technology when we talk about sustainability or climate change on the one hand, and what problems do you see? And then the third question would be, what led you to the CDR, Corporate Digital Responsibility Manifesto, which actually is what I would like you to talk about then afterwards. So pros and cons of technology, and then your journey to the manifesto.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I found when I've talked to technologists anywhere is we are all focused around the great things that can be achieved by the use of technology. That's why we do it. I mean, there are very few technologists that I will talk to who kind of worry about the negative consequences of tech. So first thing to say is technology can be an innovation that makes a difference. The second thing to say is that we are increasingly conscious that the technology can have unintended consequences, or indeed technology can be misused by people or organizations for consequences that are not great for people or for planet. And we can still get very excited about things that are new, for example, cryptocurrency, for example, AI. Yet these are things that can absolutely have a positive impact, certainly blockchain, perhaps rather than crypto, but I'll pick crypto as well. But equally, then we could sit here thinking about the sustainability impact in terms of the energy use of those, and then just kind of trying to understand that. And I've met people in events talking about the great things that their product can do, and I remember one that said, and it's based on the Bitcoin protocol, and I said, well, what's the sustainability kind of aspects of that? Ah, yes, good point. Haven't thought about that. Well, you need to. So in a sense, technology is a force for good, but it can also be sometimes unintended consequential harms or negative impacts, and sometimes intended. So as I'd kind of gone through my career, I got to a point of thinking, I need to understand how we can be more consciously aware of the things that are happening from the technologies that are being introduced, kind of massive social media or major transformation programs or whatever they might be. And so 2016, I started talking about needing to understand the impact of digital technologies on society. At the time, we were doing things like the UN Global Compact and the SDGs, and focusing on those kind of big things that were going to make a difference on the planet and society. Technology and digital isn't really covered that well in the 17 SDGs, as an example. We started talking about things like what the need for the 18th SDG. Where does it say, think about the consequence of technology and think about digital? And so I led a work stream in a global think tank led by a guy called Thierry Breton. Thierry, then Chief Executive Atos, now EU Commissioner. And we called it Digital Society, just to look at the impact on society. We did a global survey of how people felt about technology, which was fascinating in terms of whether it was using your mobile for banking or how you felt about an Alexa device in the kitchen or your bedroom, and things about privacy and things like that. And out of that came a couple of clear patterns. So people thought about or adopted technology faster if it was convenience or if it was about health benefit. But actually out of that, we defined something called corporate digital responsibility. Now, we thought we were kind of the first at the time, but I remember looking around Google and was there any mention of such things? I now know that there were mention of corporate digital responsibility previously in academic circles and some in Central Europe. But at the time, we kind of created this definition. And that was all about how do organizations think about appropriate and ethical use of technology and data to have a more positive impact on the planet or on society or communities or the individual. And hence, for me, that's when I started talking about digital responsibility. And I can probably kind of, well, I will talk a bit more about it, but hopefully that gives you the journey of the potential impacts of technology, and then starting to think a bit more about how do we use it in a way to make a more positive impact.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And my entrance into like the term corporate digital responsibility was also through academia. While teaching a course on CSR, I stumbled in a way about the digital responsibility when talking about big data use and predictive analytics and talking about the Target case. I'm sure you're aware of the what happened in Target. They scanned the data of this teenager. She was pregnant. Dad didn't know. She was shopping and looking for things, and then she got advertisement at home, and the dad found out by the mail that was sent to his daughter that was a teenager, and big scandal. He sued Target. Anyways, that was one of the entry points. I think that was 2015 where the scandal was, and around that time I found out about. And then the other thing was Cambridge Analytica, well, using Facebook data then to nudge people into maybe making certain decisions. So in a way, full surveillance of society is possible, people getting a bit afraid of this surveillance thing. And then the other, talking about maybe ecological impacts, that's where I also came from, talking about smartphone, the mining around technology. And that, for me, always was a topic. But the other thing would maybe that people not talk about so much is the data use, no? Of all the devices we use. Even now, this recording is done in the cloud, it's done through data. Everything on our apps is in the cloud. We have all these actualizations of the data, of the apps all the time. Everything we do is on data. And this is where I also now see this a big necessity, no? To talk more about how much data do we really use. And I think like things like the CDR Manifesto help us understand more where we have an impact. And that's maybe also a good entry point for you to give us a bit more an understanding. What is this CDR Manifesto and what are you manifesting in this document?
And firstly, actually, I'll just comment. I mean, going back to 2016, a lot of the thing I remember standing in Paris, kind of putting forward the case why this was important to look at, and I was referencing Brexit, and I was referencing Cambridge Analytica, and I was referencing things like the Circle. I mean, a lot of people hopefully seen the film, but the book really kind of has got some interesting use cases that made you think about how would I feel about transparency and cameras everywhere and collecting data everywhere. Ready Player One kind of started to look at that future position of transformed educational systems and things like that, the way that society has interacted. So looking to Black Mirror, looking to fiction to help us think about some of the kind of things that could happen, helps us to kind of then think about how do we kind of use things in an appropriate way. So the manifesto, what we did in 2021, so we being, there are a range of people around the world who had been looking at CDR. So just to kind of quote a few of them, Michael Wade, IMD Business School, University of Lausanne, who'd written the definition in 2020 in the MIT Sloan Review. Dr. Saskia Dürr wrote the world's first book on corporate digital responsibility, published in Germany in 2020. Ethos Foundation in Switzerland published the principles in 2020. Tim Frick in Chicago in the US has written a lot around CDR. So a bunch of us around the world from a number of countries got together and thought, how do we understand kind of the background to each of these definitions, and how do we bring them together, bring the best of those together in a single definition, which became the CDR Manifesto. And it was to just recognize that, for example, the definition that I originally did in 2016-17, we didn't particularly talk about sustainability or decarbonisation or climate change. It was more focused on the societal impacts. Saskia's work was more focused around sustainability because she's got 25 years of working in sustainability, and therefore actually taking the best of those things that had been done before in terms of thought leadership and research. The CDR Manifesto was just intended to kind of try and bring that together to help people around the world such that it was accelerating change. It wasn't about creating more definitions.
So like you said, it wasn't about creating more definitions. It was like bringing everything together. And for you, if you could resume for us a little bit, what does the manifesto say, or how is it structured, so to get a better feeling about it?
So the first thing it was quite a substantive exercise. I mean, it took 6 months' work to kind of get these groups of people around the world to find a common agreement on a set of terms that made sense for each of them. Because of course, these are all people who've spent part of their life work on creating the work that they did, and we needed a structure. So actually, we started with the CSR structure in terms of 3 intersecting circles: societal, environmental, and economic. But we did it in a digital lens. So we were looking through that digital lens for each of those. And the 7 principles that emerged were from those 3 circles and the intersectional areas from each of them. And it was as simple as simple. It was quite complex, but to really go into the depth of each of the definitions that existed, to understand how it played into those areas. So the 7 principles that we ended up with, for example, the first one, purpose and trust. So it's that intersection of all of them. What's your business here to do? What impact are you looking to have? And how do you declare that? How do you declare the way in which you're going to use technology and data for a positive outcome? How do you govern that? So thinking about things like digital ethics boards, which is a core topic of the conversation over the last few years, but still really embryonic in terms of people actually executing that within a business. So it was what are you here for, purpose and trust. Now, as an example, that was influenced by some of the work that Ethos had done in terms of their clarity of purpose and the digital responsibility code that they then talked about. Now, that's there for each of the 7 principles. It's just to think about. I mean, I could talk about principle 6, which for me is one of the most important. So it's in the environmental side, but it's thinking about innovating to solve. So we often think about principle 7, which is the consequential impact of the technologies that we use, and that's measuring carbon in terms of data centers, or if people are familiar with things like the Sustainable Web Manifesto, per click carbon impact. But principle 7 is basically saying, how can we use technology to solve some of those biggest problems? So pick climate change, pick biodiversity, pick waste. How can we as businesses solve some of those problems, because, and certainly it's a personal view, but there might be others kind of who echo that, if we simply look at minimizing the impact of the things that we do, we will not solve those problems. That helps. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Principle 7 is important, but the ability of us, of humanity, to execute change and transformation, to make a real impact in some of those big environmental issues, has to be, in my mind, innovating to think beyond our corporate boundary. What products or services can we build, create, deliver that help drive positive change? And that's all about Principle 6. Now, the reason I then talk about those is to link into other initiatives that are important and global. So the one I often talk about is codes. I'm sure you're familiar with codes in terms of the UNEP and the UNDP and a range of other organisations with the Coalition of Digital Environmental Sustainability. Now, their action plan talks about 3 shifts. First one is put the enablers in place. Second one is minimise harms and negative impacts. Third one is innovate to solve. So that kind of, the second shift is very similar to Principle 7. The third shift, innovate to solve, is very similar to Principle 6. Now, whether we're talking about privacy or lessening harms online, or the way in which we use algorithms and transparency and bias, thinking about different economic models in terms of the way that we value data, thinking about digital ethics boards, or that's the intent of the manifesto, is to provide a holistic framework that enables organisations to consider everything. And what I often find is that organisations have given responsibility for some bits of this to some people. A head of sustainability will think about decarbonisation stuff. A head of risk and compliance may think about things like GDPR, for example, and hopefully is thinking about things like the AI regulations. But very few organisations are thinking about the intersectionality and between those things to understand how they maximise their impact on society and the planet for positive effect. And when I've talked to organisations about this, there's some interesting things that I get back. One is things like, we should know that, shouldn't we? We should know what we're doing in that space and the consequential impact. And I remember somebody saying, my God, that was such an emotional experience to kind of understand those things, because we haven't thought about things like that. We haven't thought about unintended harms. We haven't thought how we could innovate even more and have a more, how would we measure that impact, for example? Yeah. So the manifesto is intended to try and open people's minds, open organisational minds to how they can have a more positive impact on society and the planet, because it's an important thing for us all right now. And my argument is it's critical for them too.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned so many points. I don't know where to start to interact with. Maybe let's start with the first thing you said, governance. And it's funny, we talk about ESG, environmental, social governance. And like you said, I completely miss all the IT aspects. Maybe the ecological impact is mentioned in the reporting frameworks that we know about today. But really, it's not given enough attention. We just did the common good balance sheet, and there's also none question whatsoever that really explicitly talks about digital impacts. Whether it's societal, environmental, economic, it's just not mentioned at all. It's not a topic. So going from CDR, we have to maybe go to CDG, corporate digital governance. So one question now would be, how could a good governance system for IT or for green IT look like? Do you have good practice advice for us?
So I think, so if I stick with the consequential impact of the technology and talk about governance in that regard, I mentioned earlier the Sustainable Web Manifesto that's thinking about per-click website. Now, if I've got a website that's got 5 views a day, it's less important. But I still think there's a principle there that think about the way you design things. I could point to things like the SDIA in Europe, so it's the Sustainable Digital Infrastructures Alliance, which is trying to kind of create best practice guidance for how do you measure the consequential impacts. There are many organisations that will be looking at how do I measure the carbon impact of my data centre or my physical infrastructures in terms of the things that we do, but to try and kind of hook into those organisations that are providing that guidance. I think the other thing to look at is just such a fast changing environment. You remember I talked about the need for an 18th SDG earlier in the conversation. So I'm sure that some people will know that the UN is last year was under consultation for the UN Global Digital Compact. So it'll be fascinating to see what emerges from that, because there's the UN Global Compact that resulted in the SDGs. I would like to think that there are a set of digital responsibility goals that emerge from the UN Global Digital Compact. And I think why something like that's important is this is a global challenge. This is not for one country to sort on their own. This is not for one industry to sort on their own. It's for everyone. So it's why I've been so keen to collaborate wherever I can with Codes, with the UN and the work that they're doing, the CDR community put a response into the consultation around the Global Digital Compact. The effort that we put into translating the CDR Manifesto into a number of different languages, because if we're trying to create a fairer, more equitable, accessible society that people can understand and drive some of these changes, well, just doing that in English it is not appropriate. So we've currently translated it into 15 languages, I think. One Norwegian about to launch, Japanese just launched. Now, that's just about trying to, again, at the start, I said it's about bringing that insight, bringing that thought leadership to anybody to help accelerate that change and to make that shift from academic thought to executed on the ground transformation. And that's what's important to us. So in a sense, I'd far rather that people focused around driving change and transformation rather than we spent another 5 years about thinking of lots more frameworks. There are a number of frameworks. There's a continued sprawl of frameworks, but actually what's important is the intent at the heart of them all. So it comes back to how do we change? How do we think about the consequential impact? How do we look towards those best practices that exist? I'll go back to Codes. The Codes Global Action Plan for a Sustainable Planet in the Digital Age launched June 2022 in Stockholm, which has got the CDR definition in the heart of that document, but it's got a massive appendix of all the other similar initiatives that are there around the world that 1,000 of us around the world identified. Really important to begin to join the dots. I've tried to join the dots around CDR, and I try to kind of interact with these other initiatives. What's important is that we are all, in whatever way we can, having that positive impact in driving change.
Indeed. So let me go on and ask in that direction. So thinking of a client or a company now hearing this, thinking, hey, I would like to start being more digital responsible and ethical. Where would you normally start? Do you have from this manifesto like a checklist that you could like think, okay, let me go through it and see where I am, like a self-assessment? Did you already develop that, or is it in the making?
So on the CDR website, so corporatedigitalresponsibility.net, at the bottom there is a self-assessment tool. That was developed in conjunction with Alchemy. So what we've done there is to take a subset of a far more detailed set of questions that we would normally ask organisations, and it develops a report back to that, whoever completes it, to kind of give a flavour, principle by principle, of what their estimated stance is around each of those principles. Now, look, it's far more complex than asking 5 questions per principle, but it's to give a flavour and to give some insight and to share some knowledge. And whether there's the more detailed version that we do, or there's some great work that a guy called Charles Radcliffe does with ethics grade in terms of CDR benchmarking. So, and there are others that are emerging. So firstly, to get a view in terms of what your organisation is currently doing. Now, what I find is that everyone is going to have different priorities. Some will focus more around sustainability and decarbonisation. Some will focus more about privacy and transparency of data and algorithms. Some will focus more around the governance and digital ethics and that side of things. So everyone will be different. And that reflects the different nature of some of the work that certainly we've done to help organisations transform. I should emphasize when I talk about we in this context, that's we as in Alchemy rather than the CDR community, which is everything's made Creative Commons openly available to anybody who wants to utilize those assets. So I think the best thing to do is to look at some of the organizations that have done things in this space. So one I talk about quite a lot often is the work that Jakob Wössner has done in Valida in Germany. So Valida defined their digital transformation principles, CDR principles. They set them out, they communicated them across the organization. Any project or program or change across the organization was intended to be consistent with those principles. And where it wasn't, that somebody could say, hey, that's different, we need to look at this. And they had implemented a CDR council, so effectively a digital ethics board, CDR council, that would consider that project and whether there were any changes that needed to be made, or whether the principles kind of would need to change and things like that. In the UK, another example that I use is Yoti. So Yoti was set up around digital identity. And when they set themselves up, they said, we commit that the data that we use to confirm your identity will not be used in any other way for commercial gain. And they put in place a guardian council that would ensure, external body that would ensure that they adhered to that core principle, their purpose. The work that next week I'm speaking in Italy with a guy called Jean-René Chartin, who's head of digital ethics and bioethics at Merck in Germany. And again, an organization that's used CDR to think about the way in which they use data and digital technologies and the impact and the consequences that has, which in a highly regulated industry that Merck operates in, you could understand they're more used to that and therefore kind of more familiar with doing that kind of thing, versus a less regulated industry where organizations perhaps are kind of doing this on a voluntary basis, which we certainly see in some countries. Germany, for example, organizations are doing this because they want to be seen to be doing the right thing. Yes, it's about having the right reputation, that right ability to attract talent, that right ability to attract investment and things like that. So I think the thing that I'd say is look towards the emerging best practices that are there, look towards the thought leadership and guidance that is there, and there is no single method or approach. And it's a big subject. You know that this is a big subject in terms of the complexity. And what I think is important is that we each are doing something better. So what can each organisation, what can each individual that's listening to this, what can they be more aware of and do better tomorrow because they've listened to this conversation?
Yeah, many things you mentioned, and just for us not to get an understanding, when we think of like a smart home, for example, yeah, we have sensors everywhere in the fridge, in the kitchen, like basically surveilling your whole house can reach huge energy efficiency. But on the other hand, all this data around you, they know everything about you, basically. Now, this is where we see the trade-off now between making information available, for example, for the circular economy, knowing where all the materials are, tracing them back. You mentioned blockchain, highly valuable, high potential, and could create lots of impact. No, but on the other side, this whole privacy issue, when do we have to use anonymous data sets, and then minimizing the risk of re-identifying from this data set. So there's a lot of discussion around that. And like you said, no, it's not necessarily always about giving the solution at hand already, but rather ask 5-6 questions that change people's mind, no, that eye openers, no, that create like a awareness, no, because I imagine that's the stage where most people start, because like you said, CDR is not like so common like talking about the SDGs. So it starts with awareness raising still. No, we're still at the beginning phase, I would say, of making people aware of digital footprints. Like one post of social media from Cristiano Ronaldo, who has all these followers on social media, has such a high digital footprint nobody knows about. Just first understanding, aha, there is something happening. I think that's so important already, no? So which questions would you ask in the beginning to make this big hello effect?
I think in a sense that's what the self-assessment tries to do, because it kind of looks at each of those principles and then just tries to kind of make people think about things. So if I think about, I haven't talked so much around the economic kind of circle. So if I kind of look at 4 and 5, and there's things in there that talk about things like business models. So for example, if you ask an organization, is your business model predicated on addiction? Because actually it's driving addiction of screen time on an app or on a website so that you can maximize advertising returns.
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for putting it in there.
Yeah. And that's a really difficult one to answer for people.
Yeah, it is.
Because no one wants to say, oh yeah, our model is based on
we want them to use it less. No, I think this is the main problem. No, as a company, you want them to use it as much as possible from the sustainability or ethical point of view. You don't. No?
And then, I mean, there's another question. If we're thinking about consumer behaviours, so a lot of sustainability, a key aspect of that is the behaviours of all of us, whether it's the cars that we drive, or the planes that we jump in, or the food that we eat. So if you're asking an organisation how they could contribute to evolved consumer behaviours, that's quite a difficult question as well, I find, because take plant-based products, for example. And I stopped eating meat 3-4 years ago, so I eat kind of plant-based products. Most organisations, I would suggest, are basing the pricing of plant-based products on maximising their profitability. Quite reasonably, that's the kind of shareholder economy model that we're used to, rather than thinking about how do you drive accelerated adoption of plant-based products because they could be cheaper. And if you kind of drive transformational change, maybe that could have a far wider reaching impact around sustainability. Now, I'm not saying that an organisation should stop making money because kind of they should have a broader impact. I'm just trying to help organisations think about the decisions that they make such that they can kind of decide where they want to better contribute change and open people's eyes to think about how they can lessen the kind of negative impacts and greaten the positive impacts that they can make. And I think the last thing that I would want CDR to be seen as is something that was restrictive or regulatory or preventing people from doing things. That's not what it's about. It's about opening people's eyes to the things that you could do differently, and about slightly lessening where there is a negative impact, those negative impacts, or indeed being more consciously aware about how you could mitigate it in a different way. So it should be about innovation and change. It should not be about regulatory enforcement, although that is part of it.
Nothing to add from me from this side. I thank you so much, Rob, for your time. We will have the description of how to get to the manifesto in the, well, that will link in the description, and also your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with you and reach out to you. So if they need help transforming digitally, they know where to find you. Thank you so much for your time. Any last words for our listeners?
Philip, it's been a delight to have the conversation. So thank you for the interest, and hopefully people do find it interesting. I'm in Oslo next month, launching the Norwegian version of the manifesto with the Norwegian IT association. Yesterday, I had a message from Slovenia, from somebody who noticed that we don't have a Slovenian language version and offering to help. If anyone's listening who thinks it's just not reaching out to some other people around the world and they would like to help in whatever way, then point them to the website or indeed kind of get in touch, and always happy to kind of have a conversation around CDR in terms of kind of the global movement, the intent to drive change, or indeed how organisations can work out how it helps them address the particular kind of need that they have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I can only say thank you also for your work, and good luck, and see you next time.
Thank you.